Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa, and this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers.
Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are glad you're joining us this week.
We always are so glad that you decide to join us.
And I'm especially excited to hear this case because Christy's been telling me how riled it has gotten her this week.
Oh, you guys, you don't even understand how riled I have been with this guy. Last month, I brought you the case of a serial bride and man-eater, Betty Lou Beets. Today, I am bringing you her parallel, the case of a serial groom and gigantic womanizer.
Oh, no wonder you were upset.
Oh, yeah. Right off the bat, this dirtbag got under my skin. He is everything that makes you a pathetic and despicable human being. I cannot guarantee that no tables will be flipped in the making of this episode. We'll see how it goes.
You'll be ranting and raving. I'll be in the corner. It's okay, Christy.
I do have a chocolate stash. You can just throw some chocolate at me and I'll probably be okay. But I do also want to put out a warning that this episode does involve domestic violence. Not only are we going to be discussing the actions of a man who couldn't be without a woman and who had zero respect for anyone else in his life, but we are also going to be touching on police culture and how being in protective services may lead to your victims having less protection from you. Even this man's lawyers were massive dirtbags and publicly laughed at his victim.
No way. It is always interesting when we cover those personnel that are supposed to be the protectors and they turn out to be the dirtbags.
Yes. And this case, when it happened, was highly publicized, so I was able to watch a lot of news clips, and just the mannerisms of him and his lawyers was disgusting.
Just overly arrogant?
Mm-hmm. Arrogant, cocky, making jokes about the victim. Not cool.
No.
And so you can imagine how I would react as I'm watching that, knowing the things that this man did. This guy loved the limelight and put himself in front of a public camera as much as he could, and I think that absolutely increased how riled I got over this case. Watching him and his cockiness literally makes you want to throw up in your mouth. I was so angry while researching this case, and am utterly shocked that there are still people who stand behind this man and are fighting for his name to be cleared. It is because of this deep down anger and frustration that I want to share this case. The women in this case need to have their voices heard. The world needs to know what can happen when an arrogant, celebrated police officer chooses to degrade and diminish those around him and then laugh about it.
I can already see the color coming to your cheeks.
I hate this guy. I hate this guy. It's one thing to be a dirtbag, but then to be an arrogant dirtbag and kind of laugh off what you're doing is adding insult to injury.
It is.
We'll see if the color comes into your face by the time I'm done. Our dirtbag's name is Drew Walter Peterson. And let me tell you, he puts the ooh in Drew. I have to include a disclaimer after saying this because I can already hear him laughing. Drew from Tales from the Estate, if you are listening, there is nothing ooh about you. But this Drew is definitely a massive ooh. Listeners, if you haven't checked out Drew and Caitlin's podcast yet, you should. It's a fun podcast about nothing and everything. Drew from Tales from the Estate is Drewy two-time, and this Drew is Drewy two-timer. So they are light years away. Drew Peterson was unfortunately born on January 5th, 1954. He was born in a suburb of Chicago called Bolingbrook in Illinois. He was the firstborn child of 3 to Betty and Donald Peterson. He lived an uneventful childhood, so to speak. His father, I believe, was in the Marines and was strict in his upbringing, but I could not find any reports of abuse. It was more so things like if the family went out for dinner at a restaurant, the kids knew they had to behave or else. Drew would look at this strict upbringing as a blessing that helped him be a high achiever as an adult.
Okay, so he didn't have any complaints about his childhood.
No. Drew was described as being a class clown and loving to be the center of attention. I found this interesting. This case is not about someone becoming an abuser after being abused. I personally think this case is more so about someone who became addicted to not only attention and relationships, but even more so addicted to power and control. Drew was athletic as a teenager and ran cross country for his school. He graduated from Willowbrook High School in Villa Park, Illinois, and right after graduating, Drew joined the United States Army and then attended the College of DuPage to study criminal justice. He wouldn't stay at college for long, though. He moved to Falls Church, Virginia instead in 1974 to attend training to become a military police officer. This same year, Drew married his first wife, Carol Brown. Drew and Carol were high school sweethearts and had attended prom together. They both would have been around 20 years old at the time of their wedding. Drew was a military officer from 1974 to 1976. He said about this time, quote, "I took pride in my work. I did regular post duty and a secret security clearance and was assigned to the Secret Service occasionally to the presidential and VIP security at the highest level." Drew took pride in the fact that he was given assignments to protect both President Gerald Ford and President Jimmy Carter. He would also be assigned to guard visiting country leaders.
So if he's getting these assignments, he must have been pretty well respected then.
He was. He does a good job as a police officer.
But then you have all that power that you're used to having on the job. How do you shut that off when you go home?
Yes. And right from the start, he climbed the ranks very quickly.
Did he have any family connections, like his dad was in the military, to help him do that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not that I read of, anyways. By 1977, he was hired by the Bolingbrook Police Force, a place he would work for over 3 decades. He earned the ranks of inspector, deputy sheriff, patrol officer, field training officer, squad officer, SWAT supervisor, sergeant, and detective. He described himself as, quote, "probably one of the highest decorated officers at the Bolingbrook Police Department." He was clearly a humble man, too.
Christy hates this guy.
Oh, yeah, he toots his own horn a lot.
When did he say that?
I found an 18-page statement that he got to make during one of his trials afterwards. And just even reading through this 18 pages riled me because he victim blames. He says everybody is wrong. Everyone is incompetent in their jobs. And just this huge conspiracy against him. And so in that, he did give a little bit of his background. Like, this is how highly decorated I am. I'm the best officer there ever was. I can't believe that this is happening to me. The Constitution's being violated. Just, yeah, a whiny little brat.
Okay.
So a lot of his quotes I got from this statement.
Okay.
You can imagine how much I liked reading through that. Because he just has this passive-aggressive, arrogant tone to everything he says. Anywhere that I saw him speaking or any written statements by him, kind of the attitude is, I'm the smartest guy in the room, and I feel sorry for you for being so dumb.
Sounds like a charmer.
Oh, he was a charmer, though. That's the thing. Drew started out as a patrol officer, but the year after being hired in 1978, he was assigned to the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad. This was a huge step up in his career. He grew his hair long and relished in his role as an undercover cop. In retrospect, peers would later comment how Drew was almost too good at this part of his job. He was so good at lying and playing the part that no one suspected him of being an officer. He would do whatever it took, including sleeping with other women. He had quote-unquote girlfriends on the street who had no idea he was a married man, let alone an officer.
Oh, so he was really good at the duplicity then.
Oh, definitely. He was also said to feed off the excitement and danger of being undercover.
That's not uncommon for first responders to be adrenaline junkies.
Well, and we know that dirtbags can be attracted to positions of power. But it was quite the achievement to get that.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge step up. Usually you want somebody with way more experience and responsibility.
Right. And he was just a rookie 1 year in. Drew was described as an aggressive cop. Because of this, just 2 years after joining the force in 1979, he was named Officer of the Year by the Bolingbrook Police Department. I don't know for sure, but I feel like it would be an unusual thing to name a rookie as your Officer of the Year. But knowing how aggressive he is, I am not surprised that this was seen as an asset to the force. Drew had always wanted to be an officer, and he was living his dream and being praised for his aggressive ways. He would have felt like a rock star in the police world. Drew bragged in a statement about his personal life as well. He said, quote, "In my private life, I owned and operated and was the president and CEO as many as 6 companies, and at one time employed as many as 100 people. I helped everybody who asked me for it, and every day I'd give the shirt off my back. Any skills that I had when people knocked on my door looking for help, I helped people at my own expense. Until this happened, meaning being accused of murder. I thought I was viewed as a great guy, and then moments and the media turned me into a monster. First chance I get, I'm going to get a tattoo on my back from shoulder to shoulder, and it's going to read, "No good deed goes unpunished." That statement now defines my life.
Wow. Is he trying to portray the murders he commits as good deeds?
Oh, he didn't do them in his defense.
But what good deed is he going punished for?
Well, I've served my county for 32 years as an officer. I've done all these wonderful things.
Okay.
I give the shirt off my back to anyone who asks for it. And now this is what's happening. I'm getting railroaded. So he's going to get this tattoo. No good deed goes unpunished.
Because he's been such a good guy.
Yeah, and he's been so wronged. And I wanted to read this statement now. So as we go through this case, you can judge for yourself how many of his good deeds he was punished for. I think you will instead see how many horrific deeds he went unpunished for and how he just whines about himself in a passive-aggressive manner. It was said that Drew was crooked in his professional life as a cop and had been under investigation throughout his 32 years on the force. He had gone undercover without permission, failed to report bribe attempts, and made deals with known drug dealers. When he was under review for his actions, Drew filed a lawsuit against the prosecutor, his police chief, and the board of commissioners. All the suits were ultimately dropped, but Drew had sent a clear message. No one was going to bully this bully, not even his superiors.
He really felt like he was wronged.
Yep.
Does he play the victim?
Oh, clearly, by that statement that he made.
Was that an ongoing persona for him?
Yes, if anyone was going to fight back, he was going to do it harder. He would teach you a lesson, which was evident by that lawsuit.
Right. But I was more thinking, is that how he manipulates women?
I don't know if he pretends that he's the victim, but I think he just feels he's so alpha that if anyone questions that or tries to put him down, he's going to show them just how alpha he is.
Okay.
So as his wife, if you're going to nag and do something he doesn't like, he's going to let you know it. People commented that it was suspicious that he was able to afford the luxuries that he did on a police salary. These things are alleged, but they are substantial enough claims that I feel they warranted being included in my report. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that throughout the case.
A dirty cop too?
Yeah, because the math doesn't math. By 1980, after 6 years of marriage with Carol, she finally caught him being unfaithful. The couple already had a 2-year-old son together, and she was pregnant with their second son when she discovered him cheating. Carol wasn't playing that way and divorced his butt as fast as she could. Drew was a womanizer. He couldn't pass a beautiful woman without hitting on her. He had even allegedly started an affair with a young woman he met during a work call. I guess his flirting took priority even over his work. Carol got custody of the boys, but Drew lived close by and would make efforts to see his boys and faithfully paid his child support. One of his sons would later comment that although a dirtbag, his father was a good dad towards his children. I guess if you ignore how he treated his children's mothers. Drew enjoyed his single life and had a way with the ladies. He was charming. It is reported that soon after his marriage ended, he proposed to another woman. She initially said yes, but later changed her mind and gave back the engagement ring. Drew did not like being told no and became violent towards this woman. It is said that he harassed and stalked her for a time afterwards. He would follow this woman around in his police car to intimidate her, and one time he even pulled her over to give her a ticket for having bald tires.
It would be hard to assess as you're just passing them on the street.
Right? He did stuff like this, I assume, until he set his sights on someone else. This will just be the beginning of an escalation of abuse at the hands of Drew.
So he constantly needs a woman on his arm to prove how awesome he is, stroke his own ego, but then if they do anything against him, he becomes violent.
Mm-hmm. He uses force and intimidation to get what he wants. 2 years after his first divorce, he set his sights on another woman and was ready to settle down again. Not that marriage stopped him from sowing his wild oats, but he was ready to get married. In 1982, Drew married Victoria, or Vicky Connolly. Some reports have her last name as Rutkiewicz, so maybe a different married name, but I'm going to go with Connolly because that's what most of the reports had. Vicky was a single mother of an 8-year-old daughter, and Drew took them in, giving them much comfort at first during a difficult time. Despite its ups and many downs, this marriage would last for nearly a decade. Eventually, Drew showed his true colors and began abusing both Vicky and her daughter. He became controlling of all aspects of their lives and would abuse them physically, mentally, and for Vicky, sexually. Vicky's daughter had enough of her mother's husband beating her with a belt and controlling her every move, so she moved out when she was 17. Vicky spoke out about the abuse when Drew's later actions were discovered. She said he did hurt her, but never to the point of going to the hospital, a thing that would change with his future wives. In 1985, when Drew was being investigated by the police force for not reporting a bribe, Vicky stood by him. He repaid her loyalty by installing microphones in their home so he could record her conversations.
Why was he doing this? Why was he so suspicious?
Well, he was already stepping out on her, but wanted to make sure that she wasn't doing the same to him.
So he was allowed to cheat and she wasn't.
Right. And I think he just had this cheater mentality. So he's thinking, well, if I'm doing it, I got to make sure she's not.
Right. Did he have a paranoid personality?
Not really, I wouldn't say. Even though I just said he installed microphones in their home. But she had stood by him. She was a good wife. The couple owned and operated a bar together called Sud's Pub in Romeoville. It is speculated that there was some shady dealing going on there. Drew's many assets didn't quite seem to add up to his police force salary. When things started to get super ugly between them, Drew threatened his wife by warning her that he could kill her if he wanted and make it look like an accident. This is something he would later tell all of his wives. Police had been called out to the residence, but the officers who responded were his buddies, and no reports were even ever made. Vicky believed he was capable of killing her, and she woke in the middle of the night one evening with Drew just standing over her, glaring at her while she slept.
That would have been ominous.
Can you imagine? She said he had a vacant look in his eyes, and she believed that he could kill her.
What was he doing there?
Just standing over her, staring at her. Coincidentally, after they began talking about divorce, Vicky was in a terrible car accident due to a faulty part.
Oh.
It isn't proven, but many believe he messed with her car, hoping to make her death look like an accident, just as he promised.
That is suspicious.
Especially after threatening your wife that I can kill you and make it look like an accident, and you get in this freak accident because of a faulty part. Near the end of 1991, Vicky discovered that Drew was in a relationship with a woman named Kathleen or Kathy Savio. Drew had been set up with Kathleen on a blind date by the wife of a coworker. And I wrote, what? On this first date, Drew gave Kathleen a photograph of himself in his police uniform. Ew, can you imagine? That is a red flag, ladies. If he shows up to your blind date with a photograph of himself for you, no, you need to run.
That is weird.
Mm-hmm. But it just shows me how important he felt that he was. I want her to see me in my uniform.
And it would have been awkward if he just showed up in uniform. So he brought a picture.
Yes. Well, he was charming, and they do say women like men in a uniform, so maybe he was just like, here, I'm going to seal the deal. Kathleen was born on June 13th, 1963, in Glendale Heights, Illinois, making her 9 years younger than Drew. He would continue down this pattern of trading one woman in for a younger model. Kathleen was born to parents, Henry and Mary, and had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. She worked as an accountant and was smitten with Drew. He had lied to her about his wife, so she didn't realize that she was dating a married man without his wife's knowledge. She thought they were already splitting up, and I wonder if he told this same lie to his coworkers, and that is why they set him up on a blind date.
That would make more sense than somebody setting somebody up on a date with a married man.
Yeah, especially with your coworker's wife doing the setting up.
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, what? What kind of woman would do that? But after learning the lies he was telling, I'm sure that's why.
So it sounds like he's almost this pathological liar to create a persona for himself.
Yes. And it wasn't that he even just said they were splitting up. Drew had also told Kathleen that Vicky was addicted to cocaine. So if anything, Kathleen felt sorry for him.
Exactly. He's got to play the victim.
Yep. Woe is me. My wife is addicted to cocaine. She can't take care of anything.
Such a good guy because I tried to stick it out with her.
I took her in and her daughter, and this is what she's doing. Vicky reached the end of her rope after learning about Kathleen, and their divorce was finalized on February 18th, 1992. However, 4 days before this, Drew took his mistress, Kathleen, on a romantic Valentine's Day trip to Jamaica. The divorce was considered no fault and amicable. Vicky later said during a newspaper interview, quote, "We had such a great life and he blew it. I wasn't good enough for him." She had no idea at the time just how lucky she was to be rid of this foul dirtbag. During divorce proceedings, the couple's assets were divided equally. They had to split their 100 stocks in Blue Lightning Incorporated. They sold and split the home they shared, but both also acquired full ownership of a property that they owned together. Vicky was given some cash and 2 vehicles, a 1990 Pontiac and a 1985 Camaro. Drew also had to pay her $100,000 for her portion of the pub. That $100,000 today would be worth more than double that in US dollars. Drew learned by this experience that it was very costly to get a divorce, a price he wasn't willing to pay again. And yes, I am foreshadowing.
They both got a property? Like, was there 2 separate properties and they both just got one?
Yes, and then the house that they lived in
Was split.
Okay.
What did she do for a job? How do they have 2 cars and 3 homes and a business? And
this is where the suspicion of shady dealings comes from, because when Drew met Vicky, she was a single mom down on her luck. She didn't come with all this wealth.
no, you're right. The math is not mathing. No wonder there's some suspicion there. Unless they're really, really lucky.
No one's that lucky.
Oh, I wish.
Less than 3 full months after divorcing Vicky, Drew tied the knot with Kathleen on May 3rd, 1992. The ink was barely dry on the divorce papers. Kathleen was almost 29 and described as intelligent, full of life, determined, and beautiful. Drew was 38. He was funny and charming and swept the unsuspecting Kathleen off her feet. For a short-lived time, Drew did what many abusers do in the beginning. He love-bombed Kathleen. He bought her expensive presents and showered her with affection. He bought a nice home for them to live in, and Kathleen had no reason at first to believe her new husband, who was a police officer to boot, was anything but the man of her dreams. It was said that she was really happy to be married to Drew.
It always makes me wonder when you have these serial marriages going on, how the third person isn't like, okay, what happened in the other 2 marriages?
Well, he's telling lies.
Right, but don't you think you'd go and like fact check? Maybe that would be only me. You're like, so you couldn't make it work twice before.
I think after hosting a true crime podcast, definitely we would be doing some fact checking, but this is the 90s. He's this officer who's super charming. And I think just even that element of being a police officer has that extra level of trust.
Right. It is a trusted professional. But I would still be wondering, okay, why couldn't you make it work with these other 2 women? And often I know people will make their exes sound out, oh, they were just so crazy. It was all them. That's why I couldn't make it work with them. But
right. And that's a red flag. If the guy you're with is saying that, that's a red flag to me because it's rarely just one person.
Right. But wouldn't you go and check out that person?
You would think so. But he could say to her, well, I married my high school sweetheart. We were too young. I was working so much. She couldn't handle me being undercover. We split up. And then the second one, he was saying she was a cocaine addict. So I had to get out.
Right. But I would still fact check.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to the first wife. Sure, you didn't like his undercover work. Why didn't you like that? Oh, because he was having affairs on me. Oh, there's the second side of the story.
Melissa, I think most women don't go and interview the guy that they're with his exes.
Well, they should.
Maybe that's a red flag for you. Good thing you married your high school sweetheart and are still happily married.
There would be no second chances for me.
No, you are lovable.
Oh, I don't know. I just think, why wouldn't you go check the backstory?
Like it's an interview? Can you provide me with some references, please? Maybe we need to do that.
But I guess in that like new love stage, you're not really thinking that at all.
No, he's given her no reason to think otherwise. He's love bombing her right now. But unfortunately, she would soon see his true colors.
You're all going to have to get along somehow anyway. He's got kids with the first one.
With the first one.
Yeah. So it's not like they're not going to have a relationship.
It's true. And he is in his children's lives.
Yeah. All exes and spouses should meet.
Oh, absolutely. And I think she probably had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you're going to go through such extensive background checking just for people you would hire at your job, why are we not doing that for people we want to share a life with?
Yeah. Why are we just taking their word for it?
But at the same time, if I was dating the guy and he wanted me to like fill out an application and references, I'd be like, yeah, okay, goodbye. See ya. Bye.
That's only until it catches on and it becomes routine practice.
Well, hopefully we just never find ourselves in that position. The couple had 2 sons together in 1993 and 1994, only 19 months apart. This means that their first son was less than a year old when Kathleen got pregnant for the second time. Anyone who has been pregnant knows that it takes some time for our bodies to bounce back after creating a human. I believe it takes 18 months just for your organs to go back to their original places. Drew was not happy that Kathleen hadn't immediately bounced back to her pre-baby body, and he was vocal about it. He had no trouble calling her fat and ugly in front of other people. He told her she looked like a dog.
Oh.
After growing his sons.
Yeah, that's a dirtbag right there.
Yep. Now that she was no longer floating his boat, the abuse towards his wife escalated. I say escalated because he had started abusing her earlier than this. It was just now getting even worse. In May of 1993, just 4 months after giving birth to their first son, Drew got so angry that he smashed Kathleen's head against a table so hard that she had to be taken to the hospital. She was taken to a neighboring town, Hinsdale, to be treated. I'm not sure if this was calculated, but my guess is that Drew didn't want anyone local to know what he was up to. His police buddies seemed to look the other way, but perhaps he was worried that doctors wouldn't offer him the same courtesy. In 1999, the couple moved into a nice home at 392 Pheasant Chase Drive in Bolingbrook. Drew afforded a large mortgage and managed to put a hefty amount down as a down payment. He had a motorbike, a boat, a swimming pool, a trailer, and more. Again, alluding to the fact that he was maybe dealing with some things not on the up and up with his pub. Rumors have it that he was allowing a motorcycle gang to launder dirty money there. I mention this, though, mainly to point out that, from the outside looking in, most people would think that Drew and Kathleen Peterson had this perfect life. This perfect life would come to a screeching halt when Drew's wandering eye landed on a much younger woman, if I can even call her a woman, because technically when they met, she was still a teenager.
Oh no.
Drew met Stacy Kales in 2001. She was working at the front desk at the Spring Hill Suites Hotel on Remington Boulevard in Bolingbrook at the time. She had just recently graduated from Romeoville High School.
How did he meet her at a hotel in his hometown?
I actually bring that in 2 seconds here. But first, 2 things about this. Stacy was only 17 years old, and pervy Drew was 47, 3 decades older than her. Say what you want about age gaps, but I am sorry, she is a child and you are disgusting. There is no way she would not have been influenced by him. Second, and this is what you just mentioned, what the heck was he doing at a hotel in the same city that he lived in to meet a teenage girl in the first place? I'll let you do the slimeball cheater math.
He was undercover, Christy.
He was not working undercover at that time. He was under the covers, Melissa. Oh, this angered me as a mom of teenage girls. About meeting Stacy, Drew later said, quote, "I had this uncontrollable need to take care of her. We just hit it off and one thing led to another. It wasn't something I planned. It was a very romantic time." To this I say, the reason you felt you needed to take care of her was because you were technically nearly old enough to be her grandfather, you sick pervert.
She's a child.
She's a child. Drew admitted about Stacy, quote, "She was beautiful, and it was exciting having a young, beautiful woman interested in me. I pursued the relationship."
Even though he's married. And she's a child.
Yep, she's closer to his children's ages than she is to his.
What's the law in Illinois?
He would have known. Melissa just looked it up. The age of consent in Illinois at that time was 17. So he literally went as young as he possibly could without breaking the law.
Yep.
Oh, when she told him her age, I just wonder how excited he got.
Interesting. But even though that relationship is legal, officially, because she's 17, he's still cheating on his wife. He's still married.
Yes, he was still married to Kathleen. Drew started love bombing his juvenile mistress. I am calling her juvenile not as disrespect to her. But to put this into perspective, if she needed surgery at this age in Canada, she would have to go to the children's hospital to have it performed. And it would have to be done by a pediatric surgeon.
We got it. She's a child.
Oh, ah. To win her over, Drew gave her lavish gifts, took her on fancy holidays, bought her a car, and rented her an apartment. Drew was still married, remember. By this time, Kathleen and Drew were sleeping in separate bedrooms. Kathleen slept in the primary room upstairs, while Drew slept in a bedroom in the basement. Drew lied to Stacy and told her that he and his wife were divorcing, but that he was still living at home to save money to move out. Stacy, being 17 and in love with a police officer, believed him. Again, I'm sure he told Stacy all kinds of lies about his situation to manipulate her. Drew managed to convince Stacy to sneak into his marital home at night to have sex and then sneak back out in the morning before his wife and 2 children, who were sleeping above them, woke up. I am unsure how long this guise took place, but it finally came to a halt when Kathleen received an anonymous letter in October of 2001, telling her that her husband of 10 years was cheating on her with a teenager. Just months later, the pair filed for divorce. Drew soon realized that Kathleen was seeking child support, alimony, and half of everything. At this point, they had their house, investments, and had acquired a second business. They owned Sud's Pub and a printing shop. This totaled over $300,000 that he would owe Kathleen, and today that is over $500,000 US and almost 700,000 Canadian. Kathleen was also entitled to half of his $72,000 a year pension after he retired, and you can imagine how well this went over with Drew. In early 2002, Drew moved out with Stacy. They moved into a home on the same street as Kathleen, just 3 blocks away.
It would be good for the kids. It actually happens a lot.
Well, they used this to their advantage, because Drew and Stacy would taunt Kathleen.
What?
They would rollerblade past her house and flip her the bird while they did it. They would also drive by slowly to shove their relationship in her face. Needless to say, things got super ugly between 2002 and 2004 after the news of Drew's latest affair was out. This time period was during the time leading up to and including their divorce, which was finalized on October 10th, 2003, as well as just afterwards. So just before, during, and after the divorce. Police were called to the Peterson residence 18 times for domestic disturbances. 2 of these times, Drew had called the police on Kathleen. Ironically, she was arrested, but found not guilty both times. Interestingly, Drew had never been arrested once.
For the other 16 calls.
Right.
That she had made.
Yes. She got arrested for the 2. He got arrested for none.
Unfortunately.
It's sad. I'm not pointing any fingers, I'm just pointing out the facts. I'll explain one of the instances when Kathleen was arrested, just so you understand how absurd it was. Keep in mind that Stacy had barely graduated from high school. This was like high school drama for her, and she was being influenced. But Drew was almost 50 and had no right to be so cruel. Kathleen was minding her business with her boys when her lousy ex and his girlfriend decided to pull up. Stacy started to call Kathleen names as her children watched. Stacy pulled out a video camera to record her reaction. And the kicker is that it was Kathleen's video camera that she was recording her with.
Oh, he had taken it from the house?
Yep, Drew had taken it from the house and gave it to his teenage lover. Kathleen tried to grab the camera from Stacy. When this happened, Drew immediately jumped in to protect his child girlfriend. He grabbed Kathleen and threw her to the ground. He forcefully held her to the ground until the police arrived. Again, his children were watching. This ordeal broke my heart, to be honest. Kathleen had been through so much at this point, and he was going out of his way to rub salt into her wounds. Kathleen was arrested, and Drew never was after beating and tormenting this woman and laughing about it. Drew would allow his children to be further traumatized over this event. In a court statement made by Drew, he explained how Kathleen had punched Stacy in the face, and his boys, ages 9 and 10 at the time, had to testify in court. He confronted his children afterwards and asked them why they lied. In his statement, he basically called his children liars and said they were coerced to lie under oath to protect their mother from going to jail.
What?
Mm-hmm.
So he tried to gaslight his children?
Yes. He had so much vengeance in him that he was willing to make his children testify in court against their own mother and then call them liars afterwards when they didn't say what he wanted.
Did they still maintain a relationship with him after that?
He does, with all of his children.
And they didn't make any statements after the fact?
They were 9 and 10 at the time, and I didn't find any statements as adults from them. And I purposely left out all the names of the children. It's not their fault. This is their dad.
Nope.
So this experience, to me, tells you everything you need to know about Drew's character. It baffles me that Drew was never arrested, not even once. Police Lieutenant Ken Teppel said that for all 18 calls, the police conducted a thorough investigation. He said that nothing was handled incorrectly during those investigations and no procedures were violated. But I think no procedures were really followed either. Still during divorce proceedings, Kathleen eventually took out a protection order against Drew. After this, on July 5th, 2002, Kathleen was coming down the stairs in her home carrying a basket of laundry. She was stopped in her tracks when she discovered Drew standing in front of her. I think he wanted her to know that not even a protection order was going to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. Drew held her hostage with a knife to her throat until he was satisfied he had tortured her enough, and I assume learned her lesson. Kathleen notified the police that Drew had not only violated the protection order, but had threatened her life. And guess what the police did in response? Nothing. 4 months later, on November 14th, Kathleen wrote a letter to Will County Assistant State's Attorney Elizabeth Fergel asking for protection from her newly ex-husband. She said in this letter that she believed Drew was going to kill her. Guess what the response was she got in writing this letter?
Did she get even a response?
Nope. Again, nothing. Kathleen also confided in her sister that she feared Drew would kill her and make it look like an accident. Kathleen and Drew were technically divorced now, but their financial settlement was still pending. They had a court date set for April 6th of 2004. 8 days after his divorce from Kathleen, Drew married Stacy on October 18th, 2003. Drew was now 49, and Stacy was not only just 19, but she was also pregnant with Drew's child.
He's not even waiting any time.
No.
Is he super insecure? Or is it a way to claim them as his possessions?
I don't know. We kind of talked about the need for a relationship when we went through Betty Lou Beats, but he always had one woman lined up before he got rid of the past one. And he waits no time. This was literally 8 days after their divorce was finalized.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And she's already pregnant. This is his 5th child if you're counting. Stacy and Drew would go on to have one more child together, making his child count 6. 2 sons with his first wife, Carol, 2 sons with his third wife, Kathleen, and a son and a daughter with his 4th wife, Stacy. Drew was growing his family, but on March 1st of 2004, just 2 months before their scheduled court date, the Peterson family would be forever changed. Kathleen and Drew's 2 sons had been to his house for the weekend for one of his scheduled visits. That Sunday afternoon, Drew packed up the boys and drove to Kathleen's house to drop them back off. They lived with their mom the majority of the time. He had them every other weekend. Drew said that when they got to the door and rang the bell, Kathleen didn't answer the door, and the door was locked. They found this strange. Drew tried calling his now ex-wife, and she failed to answer his calls as well. He decided to take the boys back to his place to spend another night with himself and Stacy. The next night, Monday, March 1st, Drew decided to go back to Kathleen's residence to, quote-unquote, check on her. He pulled up in his police car and happened to run into a neighbor, Steve Casarano. After sharing his concern, Drew had Steve come to the door with him. Again, Kathleen didn't answer. Despite being trained from an actual course in opening locks and always having a kit with him, Drew had a locksmith called to come and open Kathleen's door so that they could see if she was all right.
Well, just because he knows how to do it doesn't mean he has the right to do it.
I think he was very calculated in how this was going to play out.
Okay.
He needed as many witnesses there
as possible?
Yes. And if he unlocked it, then why did you just enter her residence?
Right.
She has a protection order from him. The locksmith came, and it wasn't until close to 11 o'clock p.m. that Kathleen's door was finally opened. By this time, an additional neighbor, Mary, had joined them. When the door was opened, Drew asked the 2 neighbors to please go in and check on Kathleen to see if she was home.
Because he's not allowed. He's got the protection order against him.
But Drew was on duty that night and was the patrol supervisor. Yet he felt it best to ask 2 civilians to carry out a welfare check. He said he didn't want any trouble. So he didn't call in another officer. He let his neighbors go in.
Yeah.
Inside, I'm sure as a surprise to no one listening, the pair made a horrible discovery. Steve was the one to enter Kathleen's bedroom and ensuite. He told ABC News that he looked towards the back of the bathroom and saw something in the bathtub, a bloated object that he couldn't recognize. He said, quote, As I walked closer to it, it was Kathy laying there naked. She was sadly deceased at age 40.
Made it look like a suicide?
He makes it look like an accident. Police, or I could say Drew's co-workers, arrived on the scene and immediately believed that Kathleen had been involved in some type of horrible accident. She had a gash on her head and her hair was matted in blood. It seemed like an open and shut case. Kathleen obviously had fallen inside the tub. The hit on her head made her pass out and she drowned. Kathleen's initial autopsy report stated that she had an inch-long laceration on her scalp. She had several small abrasions to her body and her tongue was partially clenched between her teeth. The house was not treated as a crime scene, and standard procedures for investigating a death were not followed. For example, Drew had an officer escort him into the house to identify Kathleen, instead of waiting until her body had been removed. This would contaminate the crime scene and now give reason as to why any of Drew's DNA or fingerprints could have been found at the scene, had they actually checked for any. I don't know for sure if they did, but I think that that was calculated as well. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Right. And I'm thinking about those other officers. Not only would they be intimidated because of his supervising role, but as a coworker, you would also want to be extra sensitive to another coworker's needs. Right? This is your ex-wife. And so if he made a request, even if it was off procedure, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay.
They're not thinking big picture.
No.
Like you said, they're kind of thinking in the moment there.
Mm-hmm. They want to protect their coworker.
Mm-hmm.
Not protect him and shield him from a murder charge, but protect him in like, oh, this is somebody he knew.
Right. And he has this camaraderie with these coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
They have no reason to really not trust him.
Right.
He's their supervisor. They look up to him. They take orders from him. In Will County, where Kathleen lived, the coroner was an elected official. They did not have to have any qualifications for this job. They just had to be voted in. The coroner puts together a jury to help determine cause of death. Usually, an investigative officer and a hired medical examiner present the facts to the jury. The jury would hear multiple cases in one day and then be done their duty. A new panel would be selected for the next day. Ultimately, the coroner, however, would have the authority to overrule the decision of a coroner's jury. This is much like a jury for a crime being brought to trial, except the objective of this jury is to just determine the manner of a death. For example, if an unexpected death was caused by foul play, suicide, or perhaps by accident. In May, Kathleen's death went before a coroner's jury. The members of this jury were not experts. They were chosen members of the public. They spent about an hour listening to testimony about Kathleen's death. A state police investigator told the jury that there was no evidence of foul play, and the laceration at the back of her head resulted from a fall. The coroner's jury concluded that Kathleen's death was accidental. I need to point out a few things about this. First, I saw crime scene photos, and there was not any water inside the tub. The jury was led to believe that Kathleen had drowned from falling.
How did she drown with no water?
There was no water in the tub. She had drowned. I'm assuming he had drowned her, maybe even in the sink or somewhere else, and placed her in the tub.
But how did they come to that conclusion that she drowned when she wasn't found in water?
That's a good question, Melissa. That's why I'm pointing this out.
Okay.
Second, it later came out that one of Drew's friends, a fellow police officer, was chosen to be on this jury. Allegedly, this friend of Drew's spent most of the time telling the other 5 jury members about what a great man and fantastic officer Drew was, and how he'd never hurt his wife. The coroner didn't seem to believe that having a friend and coworker of the dead person's ex on the jury was a conflict of interest.
Whoops.
Was it a whoops, or was that on purpose?
It had to be a conflict of interest, and they had to know it.
Yeah, it absolutely was a conflict of interest. And he was advocating for Drew during that jury.
Which he should have known would not be his position. Say, just by chance, some whoops did happen and he was put on the jury. As an officer, he would have known that he would have had to been impartial.
And he was not. He was very vocal about, he's such a great guy, he'd never hurt anyone, this has to be accidental, yada, yada, yada. Third, the officer who testified to the jury and convinced them that there was no foul play hadn't even been to the scene, nor had he attended the autopsy of Kathleen. He hadn't even questioned Drew, the ex who essentially found her body. I don't know about you, but I'm getting a big whiff of the ocean. Everything about this seems fishy to me.
It is super fishy.
It is. Kathleen was laid to rest just 5 days after the discovery of her body on Saturday, March 6th at the St. Andrew Catholic Church. She was buried at the Queen of Heaven Catholic Cemetery.
Is that really quick?
I felt like that was quick.
So that happened really quickly, and there wouldn't be any chance for them to have another coroner examine the body then.
Exactly. She was buried 5 days after her discovery, which seems fast on any type of circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
If I haven't convinced you that Drew is a dirtbag yet, maybe this will sway you. Immediately after the funeral, instead of going to the reception with the rest of Kathleen's family and loved ones, he decided to back up a truck to Kathleen's home and load as much as possible into the truck and then take off. He knew no one who loved her would be watching after all. They were all at her funeral reception. In his eyes, this was the perfect opportunity to get what he felt entitled to. This means that instead of going to the reception and, comforting his children who were mourning the death of their mother, good old Drewy two-timer felt the need to steal what he could from a woman who had only been buried for mere moments.
He stole her possessions during her funeral.
Yep. He went to the funeral, and then during the reception, when everyone is mourning together, he backs a truck up to her house and loads it.
That is a dirtbag move.
Uh-huh. And Drew's greed didn't stop with Kathleen's physical possessions. Soon after her death, he presented a handwritten will, allegedly signed by Kathleen, that stated all her assets were to be given to Drew, the man whom she was afraid of.
And who had divorced, even though she had children.
Yes. And I found a photo of this will, and it is conveniently written in Drew's handwriting. It was set up like a joint will, a whoever goes first gets everything type of will. He dated it March 2nd, 1997, right in the middle of their marriage. Interestingly, though, Kathleen's divorce attorney said that Kathleen told him she did not have a will.
So did this handwritten will get honored?
It did.
No.
Yep.
How did that go through probate?
That's a good question on how it did, but it did. The will stood. And by April of the following year, everything was given to Drew.
Which he held in trust for his children, right?
Oh, no. Drew sold the house that his sons had grown up in for $287,000. He also sold the bar, which Kathleen was entitled to half of its value in the divorce settlement, for $325,000. Kathleen did have a life insurance policy for $1 million. The beneficiaries were listed as her 2 sons. Since Kathleen had passed, Drew was given full custody of their children, and as a result, he would have access to it. If you total just these things together, because there's more, Drew went from owing Kathleen half of everything he had to gaining $1,612,000. Today, that is over $2.4 million US dollars and nearly 3.3 million Canadian. Not a bad payday for a dirtbag.
That was quite the swing for his finances.
Yep. He went from owing her half of everything he had to now being 3.3 million Canadian richer.
And there's your motive.
Yep. I think he had decided he was only going to lose half of his stuff once. Drew was questioned by the state Illinois police since he couldn't be interviewed by his own station. He told police that during the time in question, he was with his new wife, Stacy, and Stacy confirmed his alibi.
Of course she did. Under his thumb.
Yep. And because of that, Drew got to go on living his best lousy life, and Kathleen's death was ruled an accident. Stacy at this point did step up. She not only was raising her own child with Drew, but was now raising his 2 sons that he had with Kathleen, and then would give birth to her second child. So raising 4 children, plus being a stepmom to 2 other children, and still being super young. Stacy took it one step further and legally adopted Kathleen's 2 boys.
Bit of her.
Yeah, she really did have a pure heart, and she was a good mom. Sure, she was the other woman, but they had all been. And sure, she maybe didn't treat Kathleen well at first, but she was a child and was being groomed and manipulated by a man 30 years her senior. In September of 2006, Stacy's half-sister passed away of colon cancer at the age of 31. Stacy was devastated at this loss. She became depressed and was having a hard time dealing with her loved one's death. Drew would later say that her depression was the starting point for their marital problems.
Are you sure? She had just had 2 kids. Maybe her body wasn't the same.
Well, that part's true too. But poor little Drew having a wife that is sad must have been really hard for him. And to me, this just shows how selfish he really was. He didn't care what his wife was going through. She just wasn't fun anymore. It didn't take long after Kathleen was out of the picture for Stacy to begin seeing who the real man she had married was. Drew became super controlling of his young bride. Stacy could hardly leave their home at 6 Pheasant Chase Court in Bolingbrook. When Drew had a patrol shift, he would drive by their home to make sure she was there and check in on what she was doing. When Stacy did manage to get out of the house, Drew had to know what she was doing and who she was with at all times.
Oh, I thought she wasn't leaving the house because she was depressed, but she's not leaving the house because he's controlling her?
Yes.
Oh.
He became very controlling. There was one instance when Stacy went to get a simple haircut. During this short outing, Drew called Stacy a total of 8 times. This is straightforward abuser behavior. He had done the same type of things with Kathleen to get her to pull away from friends and family. In October of 2007, Stacy began talking to a man named Scott Rosetto. She had apparently dated Scott's brother in the past, meaning her teens. They began text messaging and sent one another emails. Some of these emails were on the flirty side, but nothing ever came of it. Stacy was searching for a friend, not a lover, someone she could confide in. On October 17th, Stacy sent an email to a friend, not sure if it was Scott, that read, quote, "I am finding that the relationship I am in is controlling, manipulative, and somewhat abusive." The day after she sent her friend this email was Stacy and Drew's 4th wedding anniversary, October 18th. Stacy was now 23 and Drew 53. That night, Drew gave Stacy a diamond ring as an anniversary present. He could afford it after all, after inheriting everything from his 3rd wife. The day after their anniversary, Stacy made plans to hang out at a Denny's restaurant with Scott and a group of other people. Before long, they began to notice a squad car repeatedly circling the restaurant, a total intimidation technique. Finally, Drew parked his patrol car and entered the restaurant where he knew Stacy was.
With his badge and his gun and full uniform, right?
Yes, he walked in full uniform and sat himself at their table. After watching videos of Drew, he was definitely a peacock. I can just imagine how he would have strutted in his uniform, feeling and acting superior to everyone else around him. He enjoyed having all eyes on him.
Would have been so intimidating, too.
Oh, yeah, because first they could notice him driving around the restaurant and then finally come in and just struts in and plops himself at their table.
As just a reminder to Stacy.
Yes.
Remember who I am.
Everyone at the table said that as soon as he sat at the table with them, things got extremely uncomfortable. This was not a friendly, "Oh, hey, I was driving by and wanted to stop quickly to say hi and meet your friends. Hope you have a fun meal." He had one objective in mind: to intimidate. Drew focused just on Stacy and her friend Scott. Finally, he turned to Scott and asked him how he would feel if his wife went off with another guy. Scott later told the Tribune that he responded, quote, "Honestly, I would trust her until she gave me a reason not to." Drew didn't give Scott the decency of a response. Instead, he just turned to Stacy and stared her down. He sat there for a good 15 to 20 minutes before he finally left.
Just staring at her.
Yep.
Wow.
Confronts Scott, "How would you feel if this was your wife?" And then turns and just glares at her. This douche canoe acted like he had just caught his wife giving another man a lap dance. He wanted to instill fear in all of them at that table, especially Stacy. Soon after this experience, Stacy contacted Harry Smith, the same divorce attorney who had represented Kathleen during her divorce with Drew. She told Harry that she wanted to meet with him to discuss divorce proceedings. Soon after that, on October 25th, Stacy called her friend Pam Bosco and told her, quote, "I have to get out of here. I'm not feeling very safe. I'm afraid he's going to hurt me." Her purpose in calling Pam was to gather information about renting her own place. She was making plans to leave. 2 days later, on October 27th, Drew and Stacy had Stacy's sister Cassandra over for dinner. She said that Drew seemed angry. When Stacy had a moment alone with her sister, she gave her a hug and whispered into her ear, quote, "I love you. If anything happens to me, he killed me. It wasn't an accident."
She knew something was up.
Yeah. Sadly, that night was the last time that Cassandra ever saw her sister. She left the Peterson home around 11:30 p.m. By the next morning, October 28th, 2007, Stacy Peterson would be missing. She was supposed to go to her sister's house that day to help her paint her house that she shared with her boyfriend. When Stacy didn't show up and her sister Cassandra couldn't reach her on the phone, Stacy's family began to feel very uneasy. Hours passed and they still could not reach her. This was not typical behavior for Stacy. I cannot imagine how terrified Cassandra would have felt when her sister had just told her that Drew might kill her less than 24 hours before not being able to locate her.
And had her family previous to this had any feelings towards Drew? Like, did they think he was a good guy, or did they think that he was a dirtbag?
That I'm not sure. I did read one report that said that her father was fine with her marrying Drew.
Okay.
I think it was, oh, he's an officer, he'll take care of her. Stacy did have a bit of a rough upbringing. But I don't know at this point in time how the family felt.
Other than her interaction with Cassandra, had they had any other inkling that it might not be this picture-perfect family that everybody saw from the outside?
That I'm not sure. I'm sure in hindsight there was.
Yeah.
If there wasn't in real time. When Drew was asked if he knew where his wife was, he said he hadn't seen her since that morning. Drew had worked the night shift, so he was sleeping in. He claimed that Stacy's phone rang at 10 o'clock in the morning, waking him up. He said she had gotten a call from a friend. Drew stated that he and his wife had a brief conversation and then he fell back asleep. He told NBC News, quote, "She was gone when I woke up." Later that evening, Drew met his stepbrother, Thomas Morphy, for coffee. At 9 o'clock p.m., Drew left his cell phone with Thomas and told him that if it rang, not to answer it. Drew walked away, and moments later, he had 2 phone calls. Thomas glanced down at the phone and saw that both calls were coming from the caller ID, Stacy's cell.
Oh, of course. So this is going to throw the timeline off.
Right. So he obviously just went to a different place, used Stacy's cell phone to call his, and made sure that there was someone there who was going to witness it. But I told him, don't answer it. Mm-hmm. Don't answer my phone, but I'm going to leave it here for a minute. How convenient, I must say.
How suspicious.
Right? That Drew just so happened to be away from his phone when those calls were made. And there was a witness left alone with his phone to be able to testify that he saw Stacy calling. After he was done having coffee with Thomas, Drew called Stacy's family and told them that he had heard from her. He had answered one of her calls. Drew claimed that Stacy told him that she had run off with another guy and wasn't coming back. So he's blaming Stacy. He told her family that she had abandoned him and their 2 small children, only ages 2 and 4. And this is the victim that his attorneys make fun of. They're having a press report and they literally are laughing and joking. Stacy who? Stacy who?
What?
Yes. Acting like she's just a lousy runaway wife.
But sounded like a devoted mom.
Oh, absolutely. 100% she was.
She even adopted his other children.
Yep.
To provide them with a motherly figure. That doesn't sound like somebody that's going to leave her own biological children behind.
She never would. So he's standing there, chest out like a peacock. Even his attorneys, there was 3 of them, laughing and making jokes and putting Stacy down publicly. And the other thing was, is he was so controlling and she was so under his thumb, he would have known if she was going to run off with some guy.
Yeah. He had bugged his previous wife's phones.
Yeah. Just like you, Stacy's family did not believe this story for 1 second. Stacy loved her son and daughter and was a good mom. She was a good mom to all of the children in her care. They knew that there was no way she would have just run off with another man and left her life behind for good. I feel like most people would never do this. It actually would take a unique type of dirtbag to do such a thing. Stacy was sweet, loving, fun, and bubbly. What Drew was accusing her of was not her character at all. By midnight, Stacy's sister was at the Bolingbrook Police Station to report her sister missing. The station told her that she had to report Stacy missing to the Illinois State Police, since Drew worked at this station. And I thought, is that true? Why would it matter unless they believed he had something to do with it? It seemed odd to me.
It does seem weird.
But protocol or not, they didn't help Stacy's family. But what they did do was quickly make a phone call to their coworker, fellow officer Drew Peterson, and told him that his sister-in-law was trying to report his wife missing.
Don't you think that he would be the one to report her missing?
Exactly.
So were they calling and being like, hey, somebody's reporting your wife missing. Do you know where she is?
I didn't hear the call. I don't know. It just did not sit right with me. Maybe I just don't know the law in that county. But I think you should be able to report a person missing in the county that they live. A county that is familiar with that area. And they're like, no, sorry. But then quickly got on the call with Drew and like, hey, just so you know, someone's trying to report Stacy missing.
That is weird.
Drew had to act distraught. So he took the next day off from work to go and search for his wife. He must be a fantastic investigator because he was miraculously able to find his wife's car, a 2002 Pontiac Grand Prix, parked at the Bolingbrook Police International Airport, only a short distance from their home. This had to prove that she had quite literally flown the nest. Later that evening, the Illinois State Police came to Drew's home that he shared with Stacy and asked if they could look around. Drew told them to go right ahead. The state police didn't have a warrant, and it was said that they were treating this investigation more like a runaway wife rather than a potential homicide at first. This was a highly decorated officer's wife that had just taken off. And many studies do claim that divorce rates are increased amongst male officers.
All first responders.
I think like 76% higher.
Yeah, it's huge.
The state police captain told the press that Drew was cooperative and allowed officers and a crime scene tech to search his home. He noted that both vehicles were at the residence, the Pontiac Grand Prix and a GMC Denali. Drew allowed them to search his Denali, but not his wife's Pontiac. As a result, the state police didn't find anything. I found it ironic that he wouldn't allow them to search her vehicle, which he claimed he had retrieved from the airport. Also, as a trained police officer who supposedly loves his wife, it's awfully suspicious that he didn't call in a team to inspect her car at the airport. He knew he would be contaminating any evidence if there did happen to be any third-party foul play.
What was his reasoning of why he wouldn't want them to inspect the car that she had supposedly last been seen in?
Good question.
That seems like a no-brainer. Here, inspect this car that she doesn't drive, but don't inspect this one that we think she drove to the airport.
Yeah. But I'm sure the whole time he was like, yeah, she left me. She called me. She told me she was taken off with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, though, this did not sit well with the state police, and they returned back to Drew's home just 3 days later with a warrant. So they had those same questions.
Mm-hmm.
Drew had 11 guns that were seized. One of those was a military-style assault rifle that had a barrel that was shorter than the minimum 16-inch requirement by both federal and state law. Police slapped an illegal firearm charge on him, but his lawyer argued that he was authorized because he was part of the Bolingbrook Police SWAT team. So subsequently, this charge was dropped. Along with the guns, police confiscated Drew's computer and cell phone. They also towed Stacy's car to the crime lab to be inspected. They returned a few days later with another warrant to continue their search. 4 search warrants were issued in total throughout the investigation. More and more police were suspecting foul play in Stacy's disappearance.
Yeah, no kidding, because he's a cop and knows how to cover up evidence.
Yeah. The state police captain made a public statement to the press on November 9th. He said, quote, "Early on, we looked at this as a missing persons case, but the evidence is starting to strongly point to Drew Peterson. I would say that right now, Drew Peterson has gone from being a person of interest to being a suspect. I would say the case has shifted now from a missing person case to a potential homicide." When police looked into Drew's past and learned that his previous wife had died in a quote-unquote accident, they wanted to take a closer look. What would be the chances that one wife randomly dies and the other disappears without a trace? Not to mention all the domestic violence calls that had been placed during his disputes with Kathleen. After the media caught wind of what was going on, Drew was being talked about everywhere, and police began narrowing in on him and his past. Authorities continued to investigate Stacy's disappearance, but also decided they needed to dig deeper into Kathleen's death. And to do this, they needed to re-examine her body.
Well, and I'm sure that they've collected statements from her sister that said, hey, if I go missing, he's killed me.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a huge, okay, we got to investigate this?
Exactly. Kathleen's body was exhumed on November 16th, 2007. Thankfully, they wasted no time. This time, her body was examined by someone who didn't know Drew on a personal level. She was actually examined by 2 different medical examiners, one being the famous former New York City medical examiner, Michael Baden. He came at the request of Kathleen's family. After intense inspection, it was determined that Kathleen did die of drowning, but only after a struggle. She didn't just slip and fall. She had been placed inside the bathtub. Her death was a homicide staged to look like an accident. Do you seem to remember anyone in this case threatening his wives that he could do just that? Make their murders look like an accident? I wonder who it could be. Post-mortem photos showed that Kathleen's body had a large amount of oval bruising and abrasions to her back, torso, and face. She also had the 1-inch laceration to her scalp, not something she'd sustained from accidentally hitting her head on the tub. It was also pretty clear from the crime scene photos that Kathleen had been placed inside the tub. She was on her side, kind of in a fetal position. I don't know anyone who would fall that gracefully and land in that position. There also wasn't any water in the tub, as I mentioned, where her body was found, and her hair was matted with blood. I think that if she had drowned from falling, wouldn't the blood be washed from the wound and be dispersed in the water?
Or her hair would have been wet and not matted.
Right. I watched one analysis of this case by Dr. Grande, who I love, and he pointed out that there wasn't any of Kathleen's clothing near the bathtub. Call me crazy, but usually when you go to take a shower or get in the tub, you take your clothes off first near the shower or tub, but none were there. Drew complained about this second autopsy. He said that the original examiner was probably one of the most experienced investigators and was one of the first people to the scene. He argued that the original examiner looked at Kathleen's body when it was, quote, in its freshest state, and determined that it was an accident. So basically saying they got it wrong the second time.
What else is he going to claim?
Right. He spoke of Kathleen in such a distasteful way. He said that Dr. Baden, quote, made different findings with his autopsy with a body that's been soaking in water for 3 years decaying. By February of 2008, State's Attorney for Will County, James Glasgow, announced to the press that after examination of the evidence, it was clear that the death of Kathleen Savia was a, quote, homicide staged to look like an accident. He had zero doubt. Before we go on, I have to take a moment to briefly explain State's Attorney James Glasgow to you, to explain why Drew will later become so intimidated and vengeful towards this man. First of all, if you picture the toughest, smartest sheriff in an old Western movie, who was always one step ahead of a dirtbag and tough as nails with a tender heart, I promise what you are imagining doesn't even touch this man. Honestly, I know no one is perfect, but after researching him, he is a real-life hero. My mind was blown. From the information I could find, James W. Glasgow is still currently the Will County State's Attorney. He is serving an unprecedented 7th term. His goal is to make Will County the safest place to live in, work, and raise a family. His team has been able to achieve a conviction rate 15 points higher than the state average.
Wow.
He has been given too many awards for me to list, but I do want to mention just some of the copious amounts of initiatives he has had a hand in creating, most of them centered on children, women, animals, seniors, and war vets. He launched a tech crimes unit to zero in on dirtbags involved in child pornography. Since 2012, they have arrested over 150 people messed up with child porn and abusing children because of this program. Along with this, he has created a child's advocacy center and created Pause for Kids, which is a therapy program to comfort sexually abused children. He also teaches children at schools and groups about internet safety and other dangers. He has passed through tougher domestic violence laws in his county and created programs to help domestic violence victims establish their independence. He even used money forfeited by criminals to donate steel frame beds to the emergency shelters and domestic violence victims at no cost to taxpayers, as well as used this money to provide many canine officers and their equipment to many municipalities throughout Will County.
Seems like a character bigger than life.
He does. That's what I mean. He's a real life hero, because I'm not even done and I could go on, but just a couple more things. Glasgow has also somehow found time to rally against gangs and help find solutions regarding substance addictions. Plus, he wrote the Illinois Animal Torture Statute, which includes the first felony charges in the state against animal abuse and torture. He organizes blood drives and has ensured there is an adequate mental health court to address cases that involve defendants who suffer from mental illness, and helps nonviolent offenders reintegrate back into the workforce. I honestly could go on, but I will stop here and say I can see why he had been repeatedly elected. In short, Drew had finally met his match, a man who would not be influenced or intimidated by a low-life woman-beating dirtbag cheater like Drew Peterson.
He's the alpha male.
He's the top dog, the alpha of the pack. It would take a while before Drew would be officially arrested. While being investigated, Drew announced that he would be retiring as Bolingbrook Police Sergeant effective December 2007.
So they couldn't take his titles away?
Yes, and his pension. His pension went under review, but it was decided at the time that he could collect his pension of $6,067.71 per month since he was not yet convicted of a crime, which is closer to $9,000 a month today. He had served as an officer for a total of 32 years. 9 years longer than the life of his fourth wife. In retaliation, Drew did everything to fight back and clear his name. He hired a publicist and put himself in front of any camera that he could. Believe me when I tell you, his attitude about his wives will make you sick. Drew and his attorney, Joel Brodsky, called a radio station and asked that they host an on-air dating game with Drew.
What?
Yep. He's a catch, Melissa.
He's a murder suspect.
Oh no, his one wife died by accident and the other one took off. He's such a catch. Let's get him on a dating game.
That is bizarre.
Yeah, this is how highly he thinks of himself. The managers at WJMK and the radio host all decided that this would not be happening.
Yeah, no kidding.
Drew did manage to appear on CNN's Larry King Live on April 11th, 2008, amongst other shows and radio stations, including Geraldo, and was called out by Dr. Phil on his show. Dr. Phil wasn't the only one sickened by Drew's arrogant and jovial attitude. Drew would crack jokes and get up in reporters' faces trying to intimidate them. He would even wave to the paparazzi like he was some type of celebrity. Instead of acting like a man mourning the accidental death of one of his wives and the disappearance of another, Drew dragged their names through the mud and even publicly threw their childhood traumas in their faces. Neither wife had an easy childhood, and he exploited that. An example of this is when Drew told everyone that Stacy's mother had gone missing in 1998. He said she was basically just like her mother and had abandoned her family.
What a dirtbag.
Total dirtbag. Of course, no one was buying this hogwash. Stacy, as I mentioned, was a loving mother and was just about to complete her nursing degree from Joliet Junior College. The only mistake that Stacy made was marrying Drew, and then, in his eyes, attempting to leave him. It is highly believed that Stacy had told Drew that she wanted a divorce, and he, being fully aware of how much that was going to cost him, stopped her from ever being able to. One document I found said that she told him on October 26, 2 days before she went missing. This would explain why he was so angry during the final dinner with Stacy's sister, Cassandra.
Because that was the day before.
Yep. As per his usual, after Stacy's disappearance, Drew took no time moving on after he was through with his latest wife. He became engaged again in December of 2008 to a 23-year-old woman named Christina Rains.
While he's a murder suspect.
Yes. She would be his 6th engagement and would have been his 5th wife.
And his 3rd victim.
I totally believe she would have been. Drew would have only been weeks away from his 55th birthday at this time, so 32 years older. Thankfully for Christina, her father Ernie issued her an ultimatum. He could clearly see how Drew was already trying to have complete control over his daughter. Christina listened and moved out of Drew's house on January 30th, 2009. Christina would later comment that she finally came to her senses and realized that their relationship was just a publicity stunt orchestrated by Drew to keep himself in the media spotlight. And like you said, I think this move for Christina may have saved her life.
You weren't kidding when you said he was a serial groom and womanizer.
Absolutely, 100% he was.
How did he even find the time to date with all of his publicity stunts, all of his media interviews, and I would imagine numerous interviews with the police, plus taking care of 4 children?
Yeah, and going on talk shows. But remember, he wanted his own dating game show.
Well, he didn't need it because he still found a date.
But he had to go after someone who was 32 years younger than him that he could try to manipulate. And thank goodness for Ernie. He was able to get his daughter away.
Good job, Dad.
Yeah. Finally, after an 18-month investigation, the I's were all dotted and the T's were all crossed, and Drew Peterson was arrested on May 7th, 2009, for the murder of Kathleen Savio. State troopers pulled him over at a car stop a few blocks away from his house. He was driving Stacy's car. His bail was set at $20 million. Drew tried to take out a loan on his home equity line of credit and then tried to sue J.P. Morgan Chase for denying him. Thankfully, in July of 2010, Judge White ruled that Drew would stay in the Will County Jail for all of his trial and appeal processes. While incarcerated and during his trial, Drew's nonchalant and cocky joking continued. And I showed Melissa a picture of this one. One time while being transported in his red prison jumpsuit, he held up his hands to show off his handcuffs and said, quote, "Look at this bling. Look at this nice spiffy outfit. 3 squares a day." He acted like it was a big, ridiculous joke and that everyone had to know that he was innocent. It's like, look, they're dressing me up and feeding me 3 meals a day.
It's just bizarre.
Just terrible.
Why would he think that would get him any sympathy or endear him to anybody?
I really believe he thought he was going to get off. He had 18 disturbance calls in a 2-year span and didn't even get charged once. I do not think he believed that he was going to go to jail.
He's already in jail.
Well, I mean that he was going to be convicted.
I don't know. I think at that point you would start to take it seriously, no? You're in handcuffs in an orange jumper.
You would think that he was.
But he totally wasn't.
Maybe when no one was looking, but in the public eye, he would later say, oh, I'm a cop. And as cops, the only way to deal with things is to joke about stuff. The only thing we don't joke about is children. Everything else is fair game. So this is how I deal with things, is to joke.
Okay.
But read the room. Even show anger. Flip them the bird. That would be more acceptable than joking.
Or roll your eyes. Like, show your handcuffs and roll your eyes. Don't be so flamboyant about it.
Just making a mockery of it.
Yeah.
Drew's trial began in 2013, where some very interesting things came to light. I will highlight some of the things that stood out to me the most. First of all, there had been statements made by Kathleen and Stacey that were made admissible in court after much back and forth between the defense and the prosecution. The defense argued this was hearsay, but an appellate court eventually ruled that this was a way for these women's voices to be heard. Information about Stacey, who was still a missing person, was allowed to establish a pattern with Drew. The appellate court ruled in April of 2012 that 8 statements made by both women could be used during the trial. Drew, of course, argued that this violated his Sixth Amendment right to confront any witnesses who testify against him. And I say, well, I guess if you didn't kill them, they could have spoken for themselves in person, Drew. What was interesting about this is that the state legislature passed a new law called Drew's Law that allowed prosecutions to enter hearsay statements into evidence under certain circumstances and conditions. The way I read it is they were hurrying this along to help out this case.
Yeah.
Let's get this passed. We'll name it even after him, which I loved. Good job.
Insult to injury,
Right? Because forever now it's called Drew's Law.
Yeah.
One of Kathleen's written statements used in court read, quote, "He knows how to manipulate the system, and his next step is to take my children away or kill me instead." Although Kathleen and Stacey were unable to have their voices heard in person, there were many others who were able to. On August 22nd, a man named Jeff Pastor testified that Drew had offered to pay him $25,000 to kill Kathleen for him. Jeff declined, but promised Drew that he would take the secret to his grave.
And he obviously didn't.
Well, when you're called to testify. At least he didn't perjure himself. Assistant pastor, Neil Shorey, also testified about what he knew. Information he had come forward with after Stacey went missing. Stacey attended the church where he worked, and Drew would come with her some of the time. It sounded like the couple did minimal counseling with him, but Stacey would meet also on her own. Reverend Shorey said that on August 31st, 2007, Stacey called him and said she needed to meet with him to discuss something important. They met the next day at a coffee shop to speak. Reverend Shorey said that almost immediately Stacey blurted out, quote, "He did it." He asked her, "He did what?" And she responded, quote, "He killed Kathleen."
She knew about Kathleen.
She did. Reverend Shorey said that he could tell that Stacey was terrified of Drew, and by the details she gave, he believed her. He came to learn that Drew hadn't been with her the entire time when Kathleen was killed. The night before Kathleen's body was discovered, Stacey caught Drew standing in their laundry room, dressed in all black and putting women's clothes into the washing machine, and they were not Stacey's clothes.
Oh, she had lied about the alibi. That's how she knew.
Yes. And this is why Kathleen's clothes were not found at the scene. Stacey asked her husband what he was doing. He told her, "You know where I've been. I was taking care of the problem. It will be the perfect crime." He told her she had to cover for him, that he was with her in bed the entire night. So by all accounts, he didn't even try to hide it from her.
And she had to live with that fact for how many years after? 4 years?
Yeah.
Would you ever trust it? How do you go to sleep beside that man?
I don't know.
No wonder she was terrified when she was talking to her sister.
Oh, yeah. And why she would believe him. Because then she sees that Kathleen's death is ruled an accident.
Mm-hmm.
So she 100% would have no reason to believe otherwise that he could do it to her.
Yeah.
About Reverend Shorey's statements, Drew accused Stacey of having a crush on him and said that she was a liar.
An awfully weird lie to make up.
Yeah. Next, a fellow officer admitted that in February of 2004, less than 2 months before Drew and Kathleen's divorce settlement court date, he ran into Drew at the courthouse. They got talking about how much Kathleen was taking him for. Drew told his work buddy, quote, My life would be easier if she was just dead. Kathleen's sister Sue also told ABC News that her sister was terrified of her ex-husband. She said, quote, "Just the Thursday before she passed away, she called me, and she just felt so strongly that he was going to kill her and it was going to look like an accident." That would have been such a terrifying way to live your last days.
It sounds like both of them lived in terror.
They did.
Of that threat, just constantly over their head.
Drew instilled so much fear onto the women in his life, and I think he fed off of it. He liked them being submissive and afraid. To add to the evidence against him, Thomas Morphy, Drew's stepbrother, who had coffee with Drew when Stacy allegedly called him, testified that he believed he might have unknowingly helped Drew dispose of Stacy's body.
What?
On the same day they had coffee, later that night, Drew asked Thomas to help him load a blue plastic barrel out of Drew's house and into his SUV. This was corroborated by a neighbor who witnessed the two men doing this.
What excuse did he give his stepbrother to load this stuff up?
He just said, "Hey, I have something that's kind of big. I need help loading it. Do you mind helping me?" And he's like, "Sure." So they go back to his house. I'll explain exactly what happens. When they got to the house, Drew dragged the container out of his bedroom and had Thomas help him get it down the stairs and into his vehicle.
What the heck are they doing with a big blue barrel in his bedroom?
That's another good question, Melissa. Nothing good, that's for sure.
Just catching rainwater in there.
Yeah.
That's what I'm envisioning. It's one of those like 50-gallon blue barrels that you would catch rainwater in.
It's exactly what it is. But he pulls it out of his room and he had to get it down the stairs. He's like, "Hey, can you help me?" And this is before they obviously come to inspect his house.
Right.
Because this is the day she's gone missing.
But doesn't his stepbrother go to the police and be like, "Yeah, I removed this 45-gallon drum out of his bedroom"?
Not right away.
When that realization hit you, it would be horrific.
Oh, it was. And Thomas really had a hard time with it. Thomas said that the tote was warm to the touch and weighed about 120 pounds.
No way.
It was still warm. The children were all in the house asleep when this happened. Drew had closed all of the bedroom doors and told Thomas to be quiet. Drew then gave Thomas some money for his help and drove him home once they got it loaded. The next day, Thomas tells a friend that he thinks he just helped Drew dispose of Stacy's body. He is not coping with what just happened, as Stacy has now been reported missing.
So he knew right away. It wasn't like he came to this realization after the murder charges were set.
No, because this is late at night, and by the next morning, he finds out Stacy's missing, and he's like, "Oh, this is not good."
No.
Thomas called Drew and told him that he wanted to hang himself, but Drew reassured him that everything would be okay. Later that night, on October 29th, Thomas called another brother, and that brother urged Thomas to go to the FBI. Instead, Thomas, who struggled with alcohol and drug addiction, got drunk and overdosed on prescription pills. He survived, but he was so overwhelmed that he wanted to end his life.
That would be awful.
Uh-huh.
You think you're just doing somebody a favor and actually you're covering up a murder?
Yeah, he just created another victim. Another friend of Drew's, Rick Mims, stated that he and Drew had both purchased 3 blue plastic containers from a cable company and provided police with photos of what these containers looked like. I read that they held 55 gallons, which is over 200 liters, certainly large enough to hold a body. Cassandra, Stacy's sister, who had reported her missing, stated that she had seen one of these blue containers in his garage 2 days before her sister went missing, and now that blue container was gone. Of course, Drew denied there ever being a blue container in his garage, even though the neighbor had seen them pulling it out.
Right.
Ultimately, Drew Peterson was found guilty on September 6, 2012, at the age of 58 of premeditated murder. The jury admitted that they largely made this decision because of the hearsay evidence permitted by Drew's law. On February 21st, 2013, Drew was sentenced to 38 years in prison for taking Kathleen's life. He was sent to Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, but was later transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution, Terre Haute, in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he was attacked by another prisoner.
They get him good?
I think he was attacked a lot, especially being an officer, being put in prison. He later is put with more officers who are in prison.
Oh, I was just going to say, usually they go into a special area.
Yeah, currently he's with other officers and pedophiles is where he's being housed. In 2019, Drew was sent to an undisclosed prison for security reasons. I believe he might now be at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, but don't quote me on that. But wait, we are not done with his charges. Nor are we done with information about this case. So stay with me.
Yeah, because there's still Stacy.
It's going to get pretty wild. Drew had his little boy feelings hurt by the rock star prosecutor James Glasgow, the guy I told you so much about. On February 9th, 2015, Drew was charged with attempting to hire a hit on Glasgow's life.
Oh.
A fellow inmate had heard of his intentions to kill Glasgow and then agreed to wear a wire to catch Drew's plan on an audio recording, and that is exactly what they did.
So he gets another attempted murder charge?
Drew was found guilty of solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire on May 31st of 2016. He was given an additional 40 years added to his sentence on July 29th, 2016. I'm laughing because I'm so happy.
That's awesome.
You can't miss with this cowboy. Drew was apparently worried that Glasgow would find a way to pin Stacy's disappearance on him. This brought Drew's sentence up to a total of 78 years. His earliest possible release date is May 7th, 2081, when he would be 127 years old. Thankfully, his pension was stopped after this second conviction. In true dirtbag fashion, Drew continues to plead his innocence. He says he had nothing to do with Kathleen's death or Stacy's disappearance and hopes Stacy will come home one day. Drew's attorneys, like I mentioned, were unlikable during this case. They came across with similar attitudes as Drew, acting like this was all just a big joke. That being said, it is said that Joel Brodsky has made claims that he knows exactly what happened to both women, but is bound by attorney-client privilege. He says he feels bad that Drew won't just come clean and had debated just telling everyone. If this is true or not, I'm not sure.
So he knows where Stacy's body is.
That's what he's alluding to.
Just dangling that carrot in front of her family.
Yeah. And I think he also made a statement, don't quote me on this one, but basically, when Drew's dead, I can tell, because then there's not that attorney-client privilege.
And they put him in a protected unit.
Yeah.
That mean to say?
No, not with a man like this. It always irritates me that they get protected, and these women were not. These women reached out for help, and they were not protected. But you're going to protect him.
Right.
It's wrong.
And especially when somebody says, I have information that could give comfort to her family, and we have to wait for him to die.
Yeah, we have to honor that attorney-client privilege.
Sometimes it seems so backwards.
It does.
I realize that it's there for a reason, but oh man, it's not working for Stacy's family in this situation.
It really isn't. And that's what's so heartbreaking. As you can imagine, Drew has made and is still making appeals. On September 21st, 2017, the Illinois Supreme Court upheld his conviction. Recently, in October of 2021, Drew filed a handwritten petition for post-conviction relief with the Will County Circuit Clerk. He says he didn't get a fair trial because he didn't get to testify, and claims that James Glasgow had intimidated witnesses during his 2012 trial. I think he's just angry that Glasgow is a better cowboy than he is. In fact, after he was sentenced for Kathleen's murder, but before trying to kill him, he said that Glasgow, quote, perpetrated the largest railroad job that ever took place in this country, meaning by destroying his life and putting him behind bars. He also said that he spent 32 years defending the Constitution that allowed this to happen to him, and that, quote, everybody should be outraged, but nobody cares. Drew also complained that a movie, which starred Rob Lowe, had been released about his story right before his trial, and said that the state took part in telling them things about him, and this did not allow him to have a fair trial.
Was that true? Was the information leaked to make this movie?
I don't know. The movie did happen before his trial. And Drew is saying they used things in the movie that I had told the police that they wouldn't have known otherwise. If that's true, I don't know. He could have just been grasping at whatever straws he could reach.
Right. But that is a big no-no if it is true.
Yeah, but I don't know. He's a liar.
He is.
So I doubt it.
And he's vying for attention. Anything to get himself back in the media and to make himself look like the victim.
Exactly. So he's blaming Rob Lowe in his movie, which I haven't watched yet. I didn't want it to influence any of the facts that I was researching, but I think I'm going to watch it if I cannot be angry. I'll have to have a big bowl of popcorn so I can chew out my frustrations. Many of Drew's own family even believe he is guilty. Norma Peterson, who is married to Drew's brother, has been very vocal about how abusive her brother-in-law is and that she wishes he would just come clean. Norma has helped to spearhead a super cool program called Document the Abuse. I think this is so admirable coming from the dirtbag's family. The idea is that abuse victims can create an affidavit to record every instance of abuse, so there can be record of what they have been through. This provides the victim with evidence. Kathleen definitely might have benefited from something like this, since calling the police almost 20 times did nothing to help her. I believe the victims can include hospital visits, police reports, photos of injuries, and much more in the affidavit. Again, it is called documenttheabuse.com if you or anyone you know might be in need of a tool like this.
So is it like an ongoing, almost like a diary?
Yes.
As the abuse happens, it's just a place to keep track of it all in one spot.
Yep. It's really cool. I went on the website and took a look. Norma says she hopes to see justice for Stacy's family, who this program was set up in honor of, and hopes that this program might help even just one other family going through domestic violence so that they do not end up with the same outcome. And honestly, what a queen.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that it's his family setting that up.
Yes.
And it also says a lot about what they think about him.
Exactly. You might think that I'm done with updates, but oh no, I am not. In February of just this year, Drew was back in court trying to get his conviction overturned. He was able to get the court to agree to a psychological evaluation for his mental fitness.
What? He's now going to try and claim that he's crazy?
Yep. It's been approved, so after this is completed, they will go from there. So listeners, we will keep an eye out for any new news about this so that we can keep you informed. But everyone please pray that this dirtbag is never given the opportunity to be released.
That would be wild. He hasn't even been held accountable for all of his crimes.
No, he hasn't. And he is so set at saying, I'm innocent. I've been railroaded. Huge conspiracies against me. Help me.
And now I wasn't fit enough to stand trial.
Yeah. But his first appeals was all that he didn't get the chance to testify in his trial. So they're allowing this mental fitness, from how I understood it. After being sent to prison and leaving 4 children without their mothers to take care of them, Drew's oldest son from his first marriage stepped up and has raised Kathleen and Stacy's children. And this really touched my heart.
It is sweet. Wow. That is an incredible human being.
It really is. Stacy Peterson, who was born on January 20th, 1984, in Downers Grove, Illinois, is still missing to this day. She would have been 40 years old right now. Her family have created a website to try and help find her. On this website, her family describe her by saying, quote, Stacy was the nicest person you'll ever meet. She was always willing to help those in need and loved to cook for everyone. She was nurturing to her children and always put them first. The website is searchingforstacypeterson.com. If you have any information that might help in finding where she is, please visit that website or reach out to your local authorities. You can also volunteer to help search for her. They get big groups together and they search wooded areas and things like that. And I have one more juicy tidbit before I end this case. After I thought I had finished my research, I thought I would just check and see if I happened to miss any reputable documentaries on this case. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that a recent one-on-one exclusive interview had just been posted only hours earlier of Drew Peterson in prison.
He's still going for the media outlets, hey?
Yep, he is. Well, he had just put in this new appeal in February. But I was so glad that I found this. This interview was conducted by Ashley Banfield with News Nation, and she did a phenomenal job. I was bursting at the seams and talking back to the screen as I was watching it. I know that is hard to imagine coming from me because I have not been opinionated about Drew Peterson at all. But I'm not the only one who bursts at the seam, because when Drew Peterson was giving his statement at the end, that 18-page statement I told you about, he starts with, I did not kill Kathleen Savio. And someone in the room hollers out, yes, you did. They couldn't control themselves either. So it's not just me. But I can't wait to tell you about this interview. Ashley starts right off the bat saying to Drew that they both know he isn't going to live to be 127, and then asks him, quote, so what's the downside of just laying it all out there? He responds by saying, quote, I'm not wanting my children to believe that I killed their mothers. I do not want my kids to think that about me. Ashley calls him out on this and questions why his response wasn't, because I didn't do it, if he was innocent like he proclaims to be. He then accuses her of being an expert interviewer who can manipulate what he is saying any way that she wants. As she presses on him why he won't just come clean, he protests that he has been honest. And girl, I would love an expert on lying to watch this video. It is so clear that he is lying. He looks away while he is speaking and blinks his eyes a bunch. He does all the standard lying techniques.
Looking up to the left.
Yes, he does. He is still so arrogant and acts like he is the smartest person in the room. He tells Ashley that his conscience is clear. And that part I believe because I don't think he has one. He is then asked if he fears that he is being forgotten. He replies that he wishes he would be forgotten so people would stop accusing him of something else. This little dirtbag actually plays the victim.
Of course, that's been his MO.
Yep. Oh, I don't want to be in the limelight because every time I do, they slap another charge on me.
Except, let's go have a dating game.
Yeah. I want to go on Geraldo. I want to go on all these different shows.
Yeah.
He says he wants everyone to forget about him except for his children. She calls him on this as well and says he sure seemed to love being in the limelight before. He says people exaggerated everything he did. He says everyone twists his story and badmouths him. It's interesting that he says he wants everyone to leave him alone, but then agreed to do this interview. Drew basically says that the only reason he is behind bars is because, quote, people enjoy seeing policemen in trouble. Ashley points out all the things against him and just how many conspiracies would have to be taking place simultaneously for him to be wrongfully convicted. She asks if he can see how preposterous that would be, and he responds, I don't care. He says if she were in his position, she would say she didn't do it too, and that everybody says they didn't do it. But he's like, but I really didn't do it.
Okay.
He also took this interview years later as an opportunity to again throw Stacy under the bus.
No, has he not learned his lesson? Like, this is not going to gain him any sympathy.
Nope. He said she was just like her mother who disappeared like that. About Kathleen, or Kathy as he called her, he said she just wanted to fight all the time. He said she was very Italian and then laughed at his own joke. He then said she was boisterous and combative and that it had to be her way or no way, and he, quote, didn't really put up with that.
So is that an admission that, yeah, that's why I killed her?
Well, Ashley is thinking the same thing because she asks him, what does that mean? I didn't put up with that. And he says that he would just walk away. Ashley, not backing down, points out that it's hard to believe that he just walked away when there were 18 domestic disturbance calls to the home. I won't tell you everything in the interview so you can go watch it yourself, but I do want to include one more thing. When the interview finished and the crew was getting some extra shots of video, Drew and Ashley kept talking. During this more casual discussion, Ashley asks him why he even agreed to meet with her since he knew she was going to ask such tough questions. He admits he is cautious of her, and when she says she is cautious of him too, he responded with, quote, I promise, unless you marry me, I won't kill you.
What?
He thought he was being funny and said he was just making a joke. And that is the case of a selfishly evil man who thought nothing of destroying any woman's life that he became involved with. The gross and arrogant womanizer, the murdering dirtbag, Drew Peterson.
That guy is a dirtbag, and I can totally understand why you were so angry at him.
Oh, I'm so riled. And this is just recent. This is still going on, that he's still throwing them under the bus. Instead of saying, oh, I am innocent, but I feel bad for their families. No.
Yes, 100%. He is a maddening dirtbag.
Yeah. But the good thing is I didn't throw any tables.
That's right.
I did shake my hands in the air a couple of times, but...
That promise may not hold true for next week when I bring you another case, though.
Oh no, here we go. Until then.
See ya.
Bye.
So raspy. It's my sexy raspy voice. Did you start that off with a yawn?
Yep.
Nice. I like it.
I'm bringing the energy today. This will just be the beginning. Nope.
Okay, chocolate time, Christy. You want Rolo or Kit Kat?
I get so cranky. It's this guy.
I don't know how you expect anything different from him, Christy.
I know. I'm not biased at all. Hey, are we having another chocolate break?
Are you flipping the table?
Oh, I am. I'm shaking my because I just hate him. How red are my cheeks now, Melissa?
They're red.
They're matching my hair. Drew. Drew. He put the ooh in Drew. Except the objective of this jury is to judge. The coroner's jury included. The coroner's jury.
Struggle, Christy. I can't even open the Rolos.
Oh no.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Catch. Oh, you didn't catch.
Your just hand.
Okay, one other one.
Sure.
You know when you have it's been in a ponytail too long and it just hurts?
Yep. And then it feels as good as taking off your bra at the end of the night when you take that pony out. I hate it so much. Oh.
You're really emotional about this one.
I think I spent too much time like watching things on him and researching, and I just couldn't even like barely put this together.
Getting emotionally attached to.
Yeah. And if you see a picture, he's just like the white hair, the mustache, like he's just like. He just totally reminds me from like a Western where he's just gonna like
personality
kick butts and take names, you know, and he totally intimidates Drew. Like Drew cannot handle a bigger alpha than him. You need another Rolo.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.